Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Let's explore an additional aspect of Maoism Third Worldism, or as I often call it, socialism from below. Third Worldism, indigenism. If you would like an explanation of that term, you can go back maybe 4 or 5 podcasts, and you will see 2 podcasts which directly address that second term and why I have adopted it. But basically, it is simply my own term for Maoism Third Worldism. So in this video, I will use the more conventional term Maoism Third Worldism to avoid any further confusion. I'm sure I've confused you already, but I'm sorry, I tend to get wrapped up in my head as I'm talking. Conscientization. It was a term that was coined by the late Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire was an educator and the developer of what is known as critical pedagogy. Pedagogy refers to the art of teaching. Critical, in this case, goes back to Immanuel Kant and the notion of knowledge and how we achieve or attain knowledge. And so the idea here is attaining knowledge and using that knowledge to teach others and raise their awareness of the oppression that exists around them, even perhaps in themselves, in the way in which they themselves are oppressed. So, for example, I can turn conscientization in on myself, and I can look at the ways in which I, as an autistic, was oppressed as a child, and how that oppression continued to an extent into my adulthood. In fact, my very recent adulthood, unfortunately. Being an autistic is no fun. I would not wish it on anyone. I would say it was even rather torturous at times. My childhood was not enjoyable. I would not say it was enjoyable in any way. Would I change it? Yes and no. I mean, when I think about the suffering I went through as a child, yeah, yeah, I don't want to go through that. And if I could go back and undo my autistic brain, I would do it. But would I be the person I am now if I were not an autistic? In other words, would I have become, for example, a Marxist, or even more particularly, a Maoist third worldist, if I were not an autistic? I would say that it's possible, but I think perhaps less likely if I were not an autistic, because being an autistic made me aware of the struggles that people experience in life, because I was experiencing them myself. Not on the same scale necessarily as many others, especially those who are impoverished. Fortunately, I was not impoverished. I always had enough food to eat. I always had clothes to wear. I did not live in a high crime area or high crime areas. But still, as an autistic, I was bullied all the time, and my father beat me up on a fairly regular basis. My mother would promise that the next time he does it, we will leave him. That next time never happened. And when I asked her about it, she said, well, if we left him, how would I support ourselves? Or how would we support ourselves? I guess that is a reasonable question. But to me, that is a question you ask after you have protected your children, not before. In other words, you leave the abuser and then you ask, how do I support my family? That seems logical to me now, but actually back then, there wasn't even a concept of child abuse. Child abuse was not invented. It was simply punishment. Nevertheless, everyone in my family recognized what my father was doing. Turned out that my father was, like me, autistic. He was diagnosed late in life as autistic. And so what we had in my family was really a battle between two autistics. But since my father was older and bigger than I was, and he was a strong man in his prime, he had the upper hand, and he would use that to abuse me seemingly whenever he had the opportunity. He might put it in another way. Fortunately, uh, as my father aged, he changed. I don't know exactly why. And we began to become close. And we even hugged from time to time. So we had a very good last phase of his life together, something which I would never anticipate. And it's something which I did not have with my mother for a variety of reasons, but partially because of the fact that she did not rescue me from my father. Although, as I said, there were other reasons involved as well. So, conscientization applied to me would be to help me increase my consciousness and my conscience concerning what happened to me and why it happened to me, to make me become conscious of who I am, of what I am, and to develop a sense of conscience or a moral compass. So the consciousness would relate to my condition as a proletarian, as a potential worker. And that is one of the most important and defining areas of what it means to be a human being if you happen to be a member of the proletariat. And conscience, or the moral compass, or whatever you want to call it, is also important because that allows us to connect with the moral realism which is embedded in nature. So again, I can take conscientization and apply it reflexively to myself in a way that I guess could actually be called reflexive conscientization. Okay, but that's not the ordinary use of the term. When people refer to conscientization, they are not generally using the term reflexively. They are using it in relationship to others, or especially to the othered, or the marginalized, or the subaltern, those who have been excluded from most of the privileges that, say, I might enjoy. And so I can look at myself and I can say, well, you have had a hard life. You have gone through a lot of difficult struggles, but you have come out okay on the other side, which is true. I have turned out to be wealthy. Before that, I got a Ph.D., became a college professor, became tenured. And so my life worked out for me, fortunately. A lot of autistics do not have that same degree of success and spend their lives living in poverty and die in poverty. And there's also a very low marriage rate among autistics. That is something which greatly troubled me personally while I was growing up, because I really, really wanted a girlfriend, and yet I did not know how to do it. And I couldn't figure out why that was. When I looked around, even though I was being bullied, I saw everyone around me dating. I saw everyone I knew going to the high school prom. I could not go to the high school prom. I guess I could have, but it would have looked really silly going to the high school prom alone. I had no awareness of how I would even ask a girl to go to the prom with me. That concept of asking such a question was literally inconceivable to me at that age. And till this day, at 68 years old, I have never had a girlfriend. That is a very common story among autistics. So when I am practicing conscientization for autistics, and some of my videos have been on autism, that is something I try to keep in mind, is the kind of disconnection and alienation that so many autistics, maybe most, but I'm not sure, experience from their social environment. And if I could, I would like to save them from that. Ultimately, that would involve curing people of autism. I would say curing people in vivo, meaning curing the fetus. At my age, curing me, I would have no idea what that would mean. I don't know what person I would be at the other end. I am already an adult, an old man. Curing me, I would fear, might turn me into a different person. So being cured at my age, no, I can't really imagine that. But say if I were a really, really low functioning autistic, in that case, I could see it, even at my age. If, if I were a person who could not function, if I were a person who sat on the floor, banging my head against the wall from morning until evening, then yeah, I could see finding a cure for a person like me were I in that situation. Fortunately, I am not, but many other people are. So conscientization, to me, is a phenomenological activity because it involves the two basic elements of Husserlian phenomenology that we have discussed before. One is bracketing, or in Greek, epike, and the other is intersubjectivity. So when I'm talking about engaging in phenomenological conscientization, first, I need to bracket who that person is outwardly, what that person's race is, what that person's gender is, what that person's nationality is, what that person's age is, whether the person may be seen as ugly or beautiful or whatever. All those things become unimportant. Those things are thrown off to the side. They're bracketed. They're put in brackets or parentheses. And instead, I try to engage with them, with their hearts and their minds. In other words, I engage with them subjectively, but intersubjectively. My subjectivity and the other person's subjectivity coming into relationship with each other. I have done that. And for me, it is a beautiful experience because I could not have done that before 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago that I first experienced empathy, intersubjectivity, theory of mind, whatever you want to call it. Before that time, I did not love another soul. I did not even love myself. I had no idea what love was. And that really, really troubled me. I remember sitting down and pondering, why is it that I don't love anyone? Anyone. I mean, anyone, including my own parents. Well, my own parents are probably not good examples since I had a lot of reasons to hate them, I suppose. But even my friends, I had no connection with them on any kind of emotional level. Rationally, yes. And so this one person would occasionally call me a human computer, intending it as a compliment, but it was obviously no compliment. Um, I'm not sure why she didn't see that, but for whatever reason, she would periodically call me a human computer. And I guess that was based on two things. One, my intelligence and my good memory. I don't have a photographic memory, but pretty darn close. And the other was based, I guess, on my mechanical type behavior. I was very mechanistic. I had to learn not to be mechanistic by observing other people, how they walked, how they talked, how they behaved in general, and literally standing in front of a mirror and parroting them. It was so unusual for me. And it went to such an extreme for me that one time I was standing around in a circle with some friends of mine, and I never had friends in the past, but I now had some friends in my mid to late teens. And when it came to me, I said that my name was Tom Murphy. Tom Murphy. Tom Murphy was somebody else who was in that group. That was very embarrassing. Very embarrassing. I felt like crying, but I didn't know how to cry because I didn't have that emotion. But I was literally traumatized by what I did, calling myself by the name of somebody who was standing right next to me. I literally had no idea of who I was. So conscientization at that age, phenomenology at that age was unimaginable to me. Now I can do it. Now I can practice phenomenological conscientization. And I don't really find it to be that difficult. It comes naturally to me. And perhaps, I don't know, I can't get inside your head, but perhaps it will come naturally to you too. I hope so. I often think of the concept in Star Trek, the Vulcan mind meld. I believe that's what it was called. It's nothing like that. It's nothing like a Vulcan mind meld. Why? Well, Spock as a character, Leonard Nimoy played Spock, of course, was the first character on Star Trek to do the mind meld. And Spock was ordinarily a very rational, logical being who did not express emotion. Occasionally he would, but when he did, it was usually when he would lose himself that he would express emotion. So clearly Spock was capable of expressing emotion, but as a Vulcan, he had been taught to control it. According to Star Trek lore, that is because at one time, Vulcans were so emotional that they nearly destroyed themselves in their hate for each other. And so they learned to be strictly rational and logical. But when they were practicing this mind meld, that rationality and logic was cast out the window. And suddenly, you would see Spock as an intensely emotional man, almost crying. His head up against the head of another person. Almost, I guess, a kind of telepathy, maybe. I'm not sure if that's the right term for it, but he would certainly pick up on the thoughts of the other person, although maybe it was just the emotions. So maybe it was just a kind of empathy, but perhaps telepathic empathy. If you've ever seen Spock or any of the other Vulcan characters do that, you know what I'm talking about. It's hard to explain it because it's not something that human beings do. And that's not what I mean by phenomenological intersubjectivity. What I mean is something much more straightforward. I mean simply bracketing one's biases about that person and connecting with that person's mind and heart, loving that person, trying to inwardly know that person. That's intersubjectivity. Casting everything else away because nothing else really matters, and only focusing on that person as a soul, as a spirit, as a spiritual being, the beingness of that person, not the externality of that person. I love it when I do that. And especially when I combine it with conscientization, which I try to do in my podcast like this. In case you didn't know it, I am actually practicing phenomenological intersubjectivity right now. I don't need to know you. In fact, not knowing you is perhaps good because I have no idea of who you are. I have no idea of how you look. I assume that there are many of you who are watching this podcast. I don't know how many. That's pretty good. So I can simply look into the webcam and speak to someone that I can't see, hear, taste, touch, or feel. A kind of amorphous person, but a person nonetheless. I know that there is a person or persons who are listening to me and watching me right now. And I'm trying to speak to your heart. And I'm trying to communicate with your thoughts, to get your thoughts attuned with my own, so that you understand what I'm saying. Not that you are brainwashed by me. There is no such thing as brainwashing, in case you didn't know that. Brainwashing as an idea has been thoroughly debunked in the social sciences. Many people believe that it's possible, but it's not. It's not possible to brainwash somebody or indoctrinate somebody. Maybe that's possible if depending upon your definition of indoctrination. But no, I'm not trying to indoctrinate you. I'm not trying to make you think the way I think. I'm trying to make you understand how I think, to get my thoughts so that you can see them. I can't see your thoughts, but I can try to display my thoughts to you and thereby communicate more effectively with you by doing it on a purely subjective level without focusing on the externalities of who you might be. And the same thing with your heart. Most especially with your heart. Loving you, feeling your heart, being in co-presence with you, to use a term which was frequently used by Roy Bhaskar, being literally in co-presence, sharing a presence with you, sharing a communion, sort of taking the COMM dash union, union together, just as communion is used in Roman Catholicism for the ritual of the bread and the wine. I'm using it for a kind of relationship that I am trying to create right now between you and I. My heart, my mind, your mind. Ideally, intersubjectivity works best when it's being practiced by both people. And since you're not here, I don't know if you're doing it. Maybe you need to think about it more, to reflect on it more, or maybe you don't like the idea and you'll never do it. That's fine too. But it works better if both people are doing it. Edmund Husserl, the guy who developed phenomenology, at least 20th century phenomenology. There was a phenomenology before that, but this is 20th century phenomenology, saw phenomenology as a model for a good society, a society based on heartfulness and mindfulness. Mindfulness and heartfulness combined together, where people are literally in touch with each other. And that is what I want. That is the world I want. And if I can use that to raise the conscience and consciousness of the people I am talking to have a realization of their oppression under capitalism and the means of their emancipation or liberation under socialism or communism, then I have accomplished my goal. So I have taken conscientization and phenomenology and mingled them together. I've mingled them together, hopefully in a way that is effective. And actually, I mean, as I'm talking about this, I'm literally coming up with new ways of understanding it in my own head. I often practice a kind of talking meditation, meaning that I understand things better as I talk about them. That has happened several times during the course of this podcast. I think and I understand. I talk and I understand. So I hope that you will consider practicing this type of phenomenological conscientization too. If you already know one of the two, good, then at least you have a start. If you know both, even better, then you can try to take them and combine them together. If you know neither, that's fine too. There are plenty of resources, including on the web. If you search conscientization and you search phenomenology, you can find a lot of books, a lot of articles devoted to those subjects and become aware of what those things mean. And so you, hopefully, will be able to engage in a communion with other people and raise their consciousness and raise their conscience, their moral compass, to an awareness of the reality of this world. And the reality of this world is morality. And what could be more moral than socialism or communism? What could be more immoral than capitalism? See, that's conscientization right there. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below the discussion area on this page, and I will respond to them. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.